Welcome to Anchor Moments. I'm Gina LeBenz, and I have a special guest with me today. Somebody I've known for about 19 years. The entire time that I have been in Girl Scouts as an adult. My daughter Alexis LeBenz was a Girl Scout in kindergarten. She was a precious little daisy, and I helped with cookie sales when she was in first grade. I was the cookie mom for a couple of years, and from third grade all the way through her senior year in high school, I was the Girl Scout leader of Troop 1914. And even after she went to college, I loved Girl Scouts so much, I recruited 5 new girls to be in my troop that were in high school, and their troops had disbanded, so I scooped them together into Troop 1914 and led the troop for 4 more years until they all went to college. But I super love Girl Scouts, and I have experienced God myself many, many times, being his hands and feet, doing special projects with the Girl Scouts. And I have a special guest with me. Tamara Woodbury is the CEO of Girl Scouts of Arizona
Cactus Pine.
Thank
Council.
you. Cactus Pine Council. That's a mouthful. But it is most of Arizona, and is it still a little bit of Utah and a smidge of New Mexico?
It's all of the Navajo Nation, so the parts of the Navajo Nation that go into New Mexico and into Utah.
Wow.
We also have Laughlin, Nevada.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, a little corner there. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because I knew there's a lot of stuff up north, too, with
Yeah.
Girl Scouts, with our council.
Yeah.
Well, Tamara, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, I've been in Arizona as the CEO of the Girl Scouts for going on 28 years.
Wow.
And really, I became a Girl Scout when I was 16. And I didn't think that it was going to be a career for me, but I wanted to be involved with an organization that I could be adventurous and do some things in the out of doors. I loved hiking. I grew up in Utah, going fishing and hunting and hiking with my father, and I was quite adventurous, so I learned to rock climb in the Girl Scouts and backpack in the Girl Scouts, and I wanted to be a mountaineer. I wanted to climb mountains, and that's how I started that. And little did I know that would end up becoming a career. I was actually interested in medical school and was completing up my coursework and working full-time at nights in an emergency room. There are a lot of very sacred moments in an emergency room, I will tell you.
There
if you want to feel the hand of God, that's one of those environments where you'll feel the hand of God.
Absolutely.
And I was volunteering for the Girl Scouts. At the same time, I was going to school full-time, working full-time, and volunteering for the Girl Scouts.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, and I was leading backpacking and doing high adventure programming. And they offered me a job, and I thought, oh, I don't know about working for the Girl Scouts. I think I'll be a medical doctor, and that's what I was working on and planning on going to medical school. And I was doing some pre-admit courses, and I was in pathology at the time and working with the state medical examiner doing autopsies.
Wow.
Which is not a fun thing.
Oh, yeah, that would be so tough.
Yeah, it's not the glamorous environment that you see on television with CSI. I kind of, when I watch that show, I'll go, I know they've made a lot of improvements in 45 years, but I'm not sure to that extent. But so I thought, well, I'll, kind of like going in the Peace Corps, I thought, I'll go be a Girl Scout professional for a couple of years. And I found it was my calling.
It really is your calling, Tamara.
Yeah.
You're wonderful with it.
Thank you.
Absolutely wonderful.
Well, it has been a blessing to serve in the organization, and it has been my career my whole life, with the exception of a couple of years when I was the CEO of the Young Women's Christian Association in Washington, D.C., and that was an incredible mission to the elimination of racism and the empowerment of women.
Oh, wow,
Yeah.
neat.
So, and I did that work in Washington, D.C., and that's where I was working as the CEO there in the nation's capital when a search firm asked me to come to Arizona and interview for the job of the CEO of the Arizona Cactus Pine Girl Scout Council. And I wasn't really ready or interested, but they convinced me. I knew I wanted to move back west, and they convinced me to come out for an interview. And I prayed about it a lot, and I came for the interview, and I knew while I was meeting with the board search committee that I was meant to move to Arizona, so I did.
Yeah. And I know that you've said at annual meeting that you love Arizona so much that they've actually asked you to be the national Girl Scout CEO, and
Yeah.
you turned them down because you didn't want to live in New York because you love Arizona so much.
That's right.
But yet you still help them a lot. I mean,
I
just
do.
this last weekend you were at a national
just-
meeting
I
and out of
was.
state. Yeah.
I just got home last night.
Wow.
So.
Well, I really appreciate you coming. And on this show, we tell about our special moments, our anchor moments, where we have felt God's presence in our life. And I want to tell you, I always go to Girl Scout annual meeting. It's a lot of fun. And Tamara gives us the most inspiring stories to all of us. There's hundreds of us in attendance, and we always just hang on every word because her stories are so wonderful. And there is one story that I will never, ever forget. It gave everybody in the room goosebumps. And so when I first got my show, and I was at annual meeting, and I don't even know if maybe I'd produced 2 shows, and that was it. So it was at the very beginning of Anchor Moments, and my book had just come out, and I had taken it with me to the conference, and I was so excited at annual meeting. And I told you, I need to have you on my show, and I want you to tell that story, Tamara. And that story begins with mountaineering. And how old were you then?
Well, I was in high school, and I wanted to, at the time there weren't a lot of women that did rock climbing or mountaineering, and I wanted to, in high school, I set a goal to lead the first all-women's trip up Mount McKinley, which is also known as Denali, which is the highest mountain in North America, and it's up in Alaska. And so I started training and taking avalanche courses and learning the skills you need when you're going to climb on glacier and you're going to be moving over snow and ice. And one of the people that helped me out with that was the owner of Snowbird Resort. His name was Dick Bass. And one of the experts that worked there in the wintertime in Utah at Snowbird Resort and was their avalanche expert was also a mountaineering guide at Mount Rainier. And her name was Marty Hoey. And there were not very many women who were qualified alpinists and who had guide credentials. So Marty was the first woman that I found, and another woman named Molly Higgins, who's also a pretty famous mountaineer at the time. And so I worked with a group of girls. I originally started out, and I wasn't thinking of it being a Girl Scout trip, but then there were other girls that were in my troop. And when I graduated from high school, they wanted to come with me on this trip. So I was like, okay.
So you're just 18 years old?
Yeah. So I'm 18. And
wow.
We trained hard, and we climbed the highest. We did a lot of climbing in Utah in the Wasatch Mountains and up in the Uinta Mountains, up on Kings Peak. We also went up in Wyoming, and we trained up at Exum climbing school, and we climbed the Grand Teton, a summer ascent, and then we went back and climbed it in the winter so that we were prepared
for the cold, because that would be so cold.
Yeah, and when you're climbing on ice and snow, it's much different than when you're climbing on rock. So
right.
So we had worked really hard, and all the time we were raising money, because even though this was, almost 40 years ago, well, it was 40 years ago, it was about $250,000 is what it was going to cost for all
Wow.
12 of us to go. And fortunately, Dick Bass was really helpful and very encouraging, and he helped us, the man that owned Snowbird Resort. And his climbing partner was Frank Wells, who was the president of Warner Brother Films at the time.
Oh, neat.
And he helped us, and he connected us, and a man at the time whose name was Yvonne Chenard, he came and climbed with us. He wanted to see, is this really true? Is a bunch of Girl Scouts going to climb, Mount McKinley? And you might not recognize his name, Yvonne Chenard, but you'll certainly recognize the company he founded, which is Patagonia. And
Okay.
so he provided us with all our ice axes and our crampons and a bunch of our equipment. And really, at that time, there were not even seat harnesses, or there was not equipment that was made for women.
Because that is 40 years ago.
Because women didn't climb.
No.
So we were quite, pioneering. And when we started climbing, they didn't even have the concept of seat harnesses. You just wrapped webbing around yourself and tied yourself into the rope. And we learned a lot from Yvonne Chenard, because he was, creating a lot of equipment. He was a welder, and he was, called him a rock jock, but he also did some mountaineering, but he was quite famous in climbing. So we had a lot of help along the way, and we worked really hard. And we had worked very hard and gotten prepared for this climb, and we got a permit to climb. You have to have a permit. You get it from the National Park Service to climb up in Alaska. And I got a call from the national CEO of the Girl Scouts with the news that we weren't going to be allowed to climb as a Girl Scout group, because the insurance company would pull the insurance.
Yeah, because it was so dangerous. They were probably
because
very
it was
worried.
dangerous.
Yeah.
But they knew that we had raised all this money, and we had been on television, but they would let us go climb Mount Rainier because it wasn't considered as dangerous. So we headed off, disappointed.
Yeah.
We headed off to Washington versus Alaska, and we gave our permit to climb McKinley to Dick Bass and Frank Wells, who had given us so much funding.
Aww.
And Marty Hoey went with them because she was their guide, and they went up and climbed Denali. And we,
On the same weekend, because you'd...
the same time frame.
Right,
yeah.
because you'd already had everything set that you were going to do it to Mount McKinley, and had to all of a sudden switch it.
Yeah, so we went to Rainier, and there were really tough weather conditions. They didn't have any women guides that could go with us, so we were very disappointed. Not only were we not climbing the mountain we wanted to climb, we were not going to be an all-women's expedition either.
Oh, because we had to take a gentleman to take you up.
Because we had to take 2 guides from Rainier Mountaineering with us.
Okay.
But we got there, we got all geared up, and they had just terrible weather for the week, that whole week. And there was kind of a window of opportunity. And when you're doing high altitude mountaineering, there are a couple of things that you have to factor in. And one of the things that can really cause you problems is weather.
Okay.
So when there was kind of an opening in the weather, we went up a day ahead of when we had planned to. And the Rainier Mountain Guides recommended that. So we went up to base camp, and you carry all your gear from, gosh, I don't know what the base is. It's probably 7,000 feet. It's been 40 years since 38 years. But we went up to Camp Muir, and there's a little hut there where you, after you've carried all your gear up and the snow, and you're in weather conditions that are, 10 below and
oh, that's so cold.
chilly, and And it was windy, but we had moments of clear blue sky, and actually where the clouds were below us, we were high enough
So
that we could
you walked
see
high enough
the
that you were above the clouds.
We were above the clouds, right? And we were, you
Wow.
know, it's a huge mountain. So I think Camp Muir's about 10,000 feet. And we stayed there that night, and we decided that
And Camp Muir, what is
Muir.
what is that like? So you're hiking up a mountain, and you're way up. You're higher
Yeah.
than the clouds.
Yeah.
So is there like cabins on that mountain,
Oh,
or you're
no.
putting a tent on that mountain
Oh,
that you brought on your
no.
back? Like what is
There's
that like?
There's a little metal shed. You have tents, but there's this little metal shed that they have up there that's just a round, you know, I don't know what it looks like now, but at the time it was probably, I don't know, 10 feet by, I don't know if it was 20 feet long. You don't have room inside for everybody to lay down. You just get in there, and it's
And so
a
you
place,
go into the shed.
Yeah, you go into the shed, and it's a place to get out of the elements
Okay.
of the wind, and to just rest up and hydrate and have some warm food to climb, because we started preparing for the climb at 1:30 in the morning, and we put on headlamps, and we were going to start climbing at 3 in the morning, because you want to move when the glacier is cold and it's really icy, because you're more secure.
Okay.
And we were trying to make our ascent while the weather was still decent. So
And how many days would it normally take? Because how many times would you have an opportunity to sleep?
well,
from
that base camp, it's much on Rainier. It's much less time consuming than it takes you a week to do Denali. But if you have good weather and you're fit, you can go from base camp to the top of Rainier in 8 hours, 5 hours. 5 hours if you're really
so you could do it
booking
in one day.
You can do it in a day, because
Okay.
that's what you do. You leave at 3 in the morning, you go up to the top, take pictures, hug one another, and then come back down to base camp. And then if you have enough energy, you go all the way down the mountain.
And then if not, you can sleep
If
or
not,
rest
you
for
can
a little
sleep
bit.
or rest. So we left
Okay.
at 3 in the morning, and we went across the first glacier and up through these cathedral rocks, and then when we went across the Ingram Glacier and the mountain was, as we were going across this Ingram Glacier, there were these big seracs that were breaking off, which are these ice blocks. They're like the size of buildings and cars that were breaking off at the top. And there had been a place where we had to cross a crevasse, which is a big crack in the glacier.
Okay.
And that's why people are tied together. You see mountaineers, they're tied together. That if somebody falls in a crevasse, that you can rescue them.
And help pull them out.
And that's why people carry ice hacks, because you have to fall on the ice and anchor yourself in, and then stabilize, and then get the person that's fallen into.
Yeah, because that's slippery. Because you could just fall in with them, and then you're stuck.
Yeah, because that's the primary way that people get killed when they do mountaineering, is they fall in a crevasse, or they're hit by an avalanche, or by falling ice. So, and when there's a big crevasse that you have to cross, they put down metal aluminum ladders that you walk across, and you anchor the ladder so it doesn't move, because people are walking across. I mean, a crack with ice going straight down like 100 feet. You can see it's really gorgeous blue colors of the ice.
Yeah.
Because glaciers are just big moving ice rivers. So there was seracs that had come down. We had gone across a place where there was a big crevasse that we had to cross, and I noticed that the ladder had been shifted, like, it had been loosened up, or the people that had tied it down, it wasn't very tight, so they refastened it. And I'm just, noticing these things, and we went up through this part of the rocky part that you keep going on the ascent, called Disappointment Cleaver. And we were getting pretty tired because there was fresh snow, and that's harder. It's much harder on a climb when you're on fresh snow, but we continued to go. And then there was another ice fall, and we got up to about we were just under about 14,000 feet, so we had another 500 feet to go. But this ice fall that we heard, I don't even think I could see it, but I could see all of this ruffle of snow. And the guides, the two guides from Rainier Mountaineering said, you know, it's going to be a hard push to get to the top because it had taken us longer to get where we were because of all the fresh snow.
Right.
Do you have enough energy for it? You know, and all the other young women were like, are you kidding us? You know, we've been training for 3 years. We've been, you know, we're going to go for it. And so the guides were standing about 20 yards from because we were at a kind of a flat place. And I talked with the girls, and they were, yeah, of course we're going to go. We can make it. Don't worry. And we had left behind two of the people on our team had stayed at base camp because they were just afraid they wouldn't be able to make it. So,
well, that's so sweet, and they didn't want
Yeah.
to disappoint the rest of the team
Yeah.
if they were going up that mountain and
Yeah.
have to say, I'm sorry, I can't go any
yeah.
farther.
So they'd stayed there.
Okay.
But I talked with the girls, and they were like, absolutely, we're going to go. And I'm walking over to the guides, and there was just this voice in my head and my heart, and just a shudder that said, get off the mountain. This voice just, get off the mountain. And I just like walked straight up to him and said, we're turning around and going down. This mountain isn't safe. And the guides kind of looked at me and said, okay. And they asked me for data. Why do you think it's not safe? And so I just said, well, there's the seracs. I don't like the ladder was shifted. Oh, you know, that kind of thing happens. I just had a gut instinct, and I had this voice that said, get off the mountain.
Yeah.
So we turned around and went back. The girls were mad at me. They wouldn't speak to me. They were like shunning me.
Yeah. They were so excited. They
I
were like,
know.
we have the energy. We can do it. What are you talking about, Tamara? We raised $250,000. We've been practicing for 3 years.
And
We've
I
got
wanted
the
to go
energy.
too.
Yeah.
I was, you know,
Yeah.
what, 23 years old. You know, I had an ego the size of, you know, a barrel. I wanted to be on top of the mountain. But this
You wanted Mount McKinley. You wanted even a taller mountain.
I know. But this voice, and then matters got worse after we went down through the Cleaver and we're going back across the Ingram Glacier. We ran into this group of men that were coming up behind us, this big group of men. And they were like, what are you doing? How is the top? And then they were kind of teasing us and making fun of us. Oh, too much for the girls. And anyway, we kept going, and we were disappointed. Got back to the base camp and got our gear, and the forecast was bad, so that's why that group of men had decided to try and get up before the next day because there was such bad weather. So those men, we left them, and they were going up, and we went all the way down to the bottom of the mountain and all piled into a little motel room. We're like wall-to-wall people in one room, and got up early the next morning to head to go over to Idaho to go do some climbing. I was trying to help the girls feel better. We were going to go over and do some climbing in the Sawtooth Mountains and hopefully have a good experience. And we were driving. This was before cell phones. We were driving in 4 different cars across Washington going east. And one of the cars drove up, and the girls haven't talked to me all night, like I am persona non grata. And one of the cars pulls up, and they're waving, and we pull over, and on the radio, they're announcing that 11 climbers were buried in an avalanche on Mount Rainier on the Ingram Great Glacier. And it was half of that party of men that we had saw.
That had teased you.
That had teased us, that were buried in that avalanche. And had we gone to the top and come back down, that's what you have to do. You
Right.
can't stay up there on top. That very well would have been us. And to this day, it's the worst mountaineering accident in U.S. history.
Wow.
There have been other people killed, but never a group of 11 at one time. And all those men were pushed by the avalanche down into a big crevasse and buried. And their bodies are still buried on that glacier.
Oh, they never even got to get them down.
They couldn't get them out.
Oh,
So,
wow. And you listen to that voice.
that's my defining moment about listening to that interior voice. Even in the face of your thinking you know what you should do, even in the face of, there's nobody that wanted to make it to the top of that mountain more than me in our group. But I'm really convinced I wouldn't be here today had I not listened to that.
If you'd not listened to that voice.
Yeah.
And I'm just going to say, I really feel that God knew if he was going to talk to anybody on that team, he knew he needed to talk to you. Because those ladies, she is this incredible leader. She is born for leadership. And those other ladies were not happy about it. But if they were going to listen to anybody, they were going to listen to you. And all those lives were saved because you listened to that voice and you obeyed.
Well, it was my defining moment of leadership, too. That, that's where leadership from the inside out comes from. That unless you're willing to listen deeply to the wisdom that's guided, your leadership is more likely to be flawed.
That's right. Well, Tamara has more fabulous stories, so many more. We're going to have another show with her, and we're going to end now. We just have a couple of seconds, so I'm just going to do a quick prayer. I always do. God, thank you so much for letting Tamara live so long with us. She's done so many wonderful things for Girl Scouts. She's been a huge blessing in my life and in my daughter's life. Thank you so much for having her here safely with me today. And thank you everyone in the audience who've tuned in today, and God bless you. Bye-bye.
The preceding program was brought to you by the Holy Spirit Broadcasting Network, HSBN Television.